The meeting of the 15th of June 2022. We've still got a couple of members to join us, but we'll take apologies for absence first, please.
Thank you, Chair. Apologies from Councillors Mike Lewis and Leslie Walton.
Thank you very much, and hopefully the other members will join as soon as they can. Second item on the agenda is disclosures of interest. Could we have any hands up for any disclosures of interest, please? Mike White.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a point of clarification. The item agenda item 4 was in the last meeting we had as well with Penn Private School. Is there a need that the declaration has been declared again?
There's a lot of backup. There's a lot of people got their microphones on, you know.
Yeah, I don't think you can hear me properly. And Chair, as Councillor Jones said, a lot of background interference. Shall I ask again, Chair?
Yes, please, Mike.
Yeah, agenda item 4, internal audit 21-22 was on our last meeting with Pendragon School. So obviously you're at agenda item 4 today. Is there a need that this declaration of interest must be applied for again today? Can I have a legal ruling on that, please?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. Yes, you would need to declare it at every meeting where the subject matter that you've got an interest in is dealt with. So it has to be declared fresh at every meeting. Okay,
thanks. Yeah, Chair, agenda item 4, internal audit, annual plan, and Governor Pendragon School.
Thank you, Councillor White. Any other declarations? No, thank you very much. If we move on to agenda item 3, which are the minutes of the last meeting, if we can take them for page by page for accuracy, please, and then if we could have some hands up for approval if they are accurate. So that's page 1, page 2.
Is there a typo on page 2? Item 5, second paragraph, last line. Should that be Appendix 2?
Yeah, it is a typo.
Yes, it is a typo. Thank you very much. Appendix 3, page 3, page 4, and page 5. If they're an accurate reflection of those in attendance, could we have some hands up to prove them, please?
I propose you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams. Thank you, Councillor Mike White. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. If we could move on to item 4, which is the internal audit plan 21-22, monitoring report for the period January 22 to March 22. And I'd like to welcome Nick Davis, who's covering for Simon Cockings. So if you can take us through the report, please, Nick, and picking up the key points that you wish to draw to the committee's attention, and then we shall open up for questions.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nick Davis, the Principal Auditor. As you mentioned, Simon's currently away on holiday, so I'm here to present 2 reports today. The first being agenda item number 4 on page 6 of the reports pack, which is our quarterly monitoring report for the period the 1st of January to the 31st of March 22. And the second agenda item number 7, a report for the same period. Just to remind members that both reports are for information only, and therefore I'm only going to highlight the main points listed. I am aware that contained in our monitoring report there are 2 moderate assurance reviews listed. We do have officers in attendance to give committee some further updates in relation to the FOI SAR review. And I believe we have a verbal update response in relation to the Accounts Receivable review. So, okay, if members can turn to page 6 of the reports pack, and the first document is our Q4 monitoring report. And this shows the audits finalised during the period and any other work carried out by the team. So if we start on page 7, which is point 2, so the audits finalised in Q4. There were 30 audits finalised, which are all listed in Appendix 1, and they show the level of assurance given at the end of each of the audits and the number of recommendations made and agreed. Appendix 2 then provides a summary of the scope of the reviews finalised during that period. 2.2, each report is awarded assurance level, and you can see of the 30 reports, 11 were high, 17 substantial and 2 moderate. A total of 188 recommendations were made to management, and they agreed to implement 184 of those recommendations, and details of the 4 that weren't accepted can be found in Appendix 3 with a bit more narrative. 2.4, all the recommendations are classed as either high risk, medium, low or good practice, and the table below shows the breakdown of the 184 recommendations that have been agreed. On to 2.6 at the bottom of page 7. The team also certified the following grant, which was the housing support grant of £14 million. If we move down to 2.11, Simon did go through this in the last meeting, but as of the 31st of March, and you can see the detail behind this in Appendix 4, 96 audit activities had been completed to at least draft report stage, which was 73% of the plan, with, as previously reported, 11 audits noted as being in progress, which is 8%. 2.12, there's 2 moderate reports were issued in the quarter, and the following tables provide brief details of some of the significant issues which led to those services being issued with a moderate rating. And as stated earlier, I'm not going to go into any detail here, as we do have officers in attendance from those areas to give committee further updates. So if we move on to page 11 and point 3, during the quarter, we completed a number of follow-ups, 4 in fact, and 3.3, the first follow-up that we did in relation to a moderate report was the Grand Theatre. We completed the review in March and concluded that significant progress had been made by the service and all recommendations had been fully implemented. The second follow-up we undertook was for the management of absence review. Again, good progress had been made here, with only 4 of the 19 recommendations not being implemented, and those 4 remaining 4 are linked to the implementation of the Oracle Fusion database, which is scheduled to be implemented by October this year. So once that comes in, we'll retest all of those areas in the next full audit. Point C, there's the community equipment service and the community alarm service. So both of these are managed by the same team. So firstly, the community equipment service, we confirmed that 10 of the 17 recommendations had been fully implemented, and of the remaining 7, 6 had been partly implemented. Committee are aware of the issues with these services, as I know officers have been in attendance in the past. There are some recruitment issues and staff training and historical issues with the database, so we are looking obviously to give those services a little bit of time to get those things in place, and we will be going out to do a full audit in early 23-24. And similarly for the community alarm service, on page 13, 4 of the 19 recommendations were fully implemented. The remaining 4 were being noted as partly implemented. So same for this service, we do both together and in the early part of 23-24. If we move on then to the appendices, and Appendix 1 shows the 30 audits that were finalised during the quarter. Appendix 2 shows the scope of those reviews for the 30 audits. Appendix 3 shows those recommendations that were not accepted by management and some details regarding why they weren't accepted. And you can see most of them are good practices and one low risk. And finally, Appendix 4 shows the plan and the status of each audit activity as at the 31st of the 3rd, 2020. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nick. I'm going to open up for questions soon, but if members can bear in mind that we do have officers present to give an update against the 2 moderate reports, the AR and the FOI report. So we just need to be minded that some of the questions may be better related to those officers to respond in support of what's been raised by the auditors. So if I can open up for questions, please, if I can have some hands up. Councillor Jeff Jones. You're on mute, Councillor Jones.
Yes, I do have a question, but I think I need to declare perhaps a personal interest. I know it's mentioned about the, the Grand Theatre, the audit carried out. I was actually part of a group actually looking at a problematic, well, the problems actually in the Grand Theatre. And I actually sat on an appeals and awards committee, so I think I should, I don't know if I need personal advice now with regards to would I have a personal interest actually in that? If I can ask the legal officer.
No, I wouldn't see that as anything that would prevent you from participating in, because this is quite narrow in its remit in terms of the audit. I don't think the subject matter would impinge upon any of the information that was dealt with within the appeals and awards process. So as long as the discussion stays clear of that, I think, Councillor, you're able to deal with it. I don't think there's an interest for you to declare. Okay, thanks for that. Right, if I can go on to the question then, it's page 9, 2.13, accounts receivable. I know we've got officers here and so on, and perhaps they can, answer questions actually on this. I must admit, when I read it, I was disappointed initially, because I know it's been brought up in the past with regards to, disputed invoices and amounts outstanding. Disappointed really that I can actually see that there didn't seem to be any process actually in place. I think it's actually said here that there was insufficient effort to actually address disputed invoices. I know that the figure's 3.5 million, which is probably quite small, but my concerns are that it's been left really, nothing's been there to actually chase any of these invoices actually up. And well, I'm going to ask the officers really, are these invoices now being progressed, or are they just going to be left at the end of the day? And with some of these invoices, I know they've got figures there and so on with regard to the number. Are there any invoices from, shall we say, the same person or the same supplier at the end of the day? My concerns really are that they get away with it once and, we don't chase them up for the disputed invoice. Is there a similar invoice that they will submit, and hopefully we will not chase that one again?
Can I suggest that we bring the officer that's going to respond to the Accounts Receivable report in now, so those questions can be asked at the same time? Is it Adam? Are you going to?
It is, Chair, if I may. I'm by no means the expert in this area, but there will be a fuller report, and a number of these questions will be picked up during the next item. But I'll pick up some bits now as Jeff has asked. So there was a process in place. What it wasn't being happening was identified early enough and progressed. So bearing in mind that although we have a responsibility within the service centre, the services themselves have a responsibility to chase those debts. So it's not all just aimed at one bit, and that's where the process is broken down a little, I would say, across the services about who was chasing when. So there was a process. It probably just wasn't administered perhaps as well as we wanted it to. Certainly in terms of disputed invoices, that there is a requirement if it's a statutory function that is being delivered, and if multiple invoices are put out, if you like, for those services, we would still have to go along that service. So we couldn't withhold the fact that they hadn't paid that invoice. We couldn't then withhold any service because it's a statutory function we have to deliver, unfortunately. So that's one of the things that we are looking at in how could we address that. So there may be, well, there definitely were on occasion some invoices that were, even though they hadn't paid the previous one, we still had to send out another invoice because it's a statutory function. So we legally couldn't stop it at that point. But we then look for corrective action in terms of how else we could provide a service or deliver it. But we can't just stop it automatically.
Sorry, Chair, can I just, clarify there? It actually says here that invoice is received, by the service. The income for that invoice is actually given to the service straight away. So to me, there's no incentive for the service, shall we say, to progress any unpaid invoices. So all, shall we say, the service providers, we actually provide a service for somebody, send an invoice out. As soon as the invoice is raised, the service actually gets the income for that service at the end of the day. So, they've not got any incentive. I couldn't quite understand where you said they've got a part to actually play in this. So would they know at the end of the day that that invoice is not paid because they received the money?
Yeah, so all directors get received as part of our performance and financial monitoring system. We have a meeting on a monthly basis. All directors and heads of service would have access to that information that shows which invoices have not been paid, how long it's been outstanding, and that they need to take corrective action. So that gets picked up at P&FM, and that's where the service should pick in. And although they may well have received the money from the centre, the reality is that we all have a duty under the standing orders and financial regs for us to chase money where it is due, regardless of where it sits. So it is the service responsibility regardless under our constitution and financial regs.
Okay. Okay, Jeff?
Yes, there's a lot of other questions that actually raised, if the heads of service are aware of this, why didn't they progress things, further down the line, shall we say?
Okay, there's a couple of hands up, so perhaps we can take some more questions. We'll come back to that. I think the next one I've got on the list is Julie Davis.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report, Nick. Could I take you to Appendix 2, please, and ask you to explain how audit ratings are arrived at? Because I've got a number of concerns over the high and substantial ratings. Looking at the key findings, I would not necessarily have given, for example, a substantial rating to disaster recovery and business continuity, which is on page 24. And the key risk, the key findings that you said is that there's no testing of the disaster recovery plan. Server replacement lead time is increased from 12 weeks to possibly 12 months. It's not in the risk register, and there's no formal recovery agreements in place yet. So could you tell me how a substantial rating can be justified, please?
Yeah, thanks, Julie. I'd have to look at the detail of the report, but all reports are they go through the process of going through senior auditor and through myself before issuing. So yeah, if you need to see that detailed report, and I can certainly look at the recommendations and the level of ratings that we've given to the individual risks, which feed into the overall assurance level. So yeah, I can certainly make a note of that for you, Julie, and I'll get back to you on that once I can see the full detail of that report.
Okay, and you could also look at information governance. because only 56.6% of training was completed, and yet again is given substantial rating, and I would think that would be a high risk.
I think, again, with that one, I'll need to see the detail, in the findings. But obviously, if that is one recommendation in the report that, say, attracts a one medium risk recommendation, then that wouldn't necessarily, amount to a moderate rating for the overall assurance. When we look at the recommendations, there could be 10 or there could be 5 low risk and 1 medium risk. Then that could be a substantial. It depends on the number of recommendations that are, say, a medium or high risk that will feed in then to that overall assurance rating. So when I look at the individual report, look how many recommendations there are, look at what levels of recommendation they are, then that feeds into the overall assurance. So yeah, again, we can look into that for you, no problem.
Okay, thank you. And
Can I just come in on that one, please? I think there's a number of reports there that could raise an eyebrow on the substantial ratings, as Julie says, with the commentary aside of it. Could I suggest that perhaps Simon, when he returns from leave, presents some narrative in the next report, just to give us a better understanding of some of that information, and if any members of the Governance and Audit Committee wishes to see those full reports, then I do have copies of them, and I'm sure I'd be happy to share them with members. Some have already asked for them, and I think if it's a general observation across a number of areas, then I think it's right and proper to suggest that the Chief Auditor picks some of the narrative up to respond to some of those concerns. Is that okay, Nick?
Yeah, that's fine, Chair. And as I said, we do issue a matrix with each report showing, the descriptions of our assurance levels and our recommendations. So there is a bit of guidance there for the client when we do issue those reports to see why we've given them those assurance ratings. So yeah, we've got some evidence behind that, but yeah, certainly happy to look into that again.
thank you. And if I could take you to Appendix 4. This time last year, I asked for a review of the front end of the debtors process, and I'm wondering whether debt recovery, financial services and legal recovery audit would cover those front end, because as Adam said, the process is breaking down over confusion about who's responsible for chasing debts. So I would like to see that review of the front end processes, specifically within the services, because AR is just the back end.
Yeah.
No, carry on.
Carry on, yeah.
And in terms of the corporate governance review, it's still in progress, because Simon told us at the last audit committee that it was nearing finalisation.
Yeah, to update on that, Julie. That was reviewed yesterday. It's now complete. It's been reviewed. There are 2 recommendations. It hasn't gone out as draft yet. It will be by the end of this week. 2 recommendations are low risk and I think a good practice. So no issues identified there, and that will be issued as draft by the end of the week.
And did you consider, as part of that corporate governance review, the impact of having an interim chief executive, given the fact that the outgoing chief executive would have given quite substantial advance notice of his retirement?
We wouldn't have looked at that. I can give you a detailed list of what areas we have looked at, including service plans and so on. But no, we wouldn't have looked at that in this particular review.
So do you think the corporate governance would be compromised?
I wouldn't have thought so. I've got no further comment on that.
Can I come in here, please? The Wales Audit Office, or Audit Wales, are actually doing some work at the moment on that. And I'm pretty sure they would have covered that within the scope. So again, Adam, do you want to add to that at all?
The only bit I'd really want to say is certainly in terms of corporate governance, it's not unusual for a local authority to have an interim, especially after such a great piece of change that we've seen through COVID. It would to be honest, I'd say it's better governance, certainly in terms of that the interims come from inside, a very credible, experienced director that knows the authority inside out and back to front. Got that experience within the authority for many, many years and went through a robust internal process. So I think as an interim, I'd say it's strengthened our current corporate governance, having the interim chief exec that we've got. And then I think that gives enough time, certainly with a changing administration and so on. There's a lot of changes. So I'd say that actually we're in a strong position. The fact that the chief executive gave sufficient notice and allowed that interim to be put in place in sufficient time for a handover to take place before he left with the interim, again, gave good corporate governance in terms of that continuation of service. We've already got the director in place now to replace him. So again, that continuation of service has happened. So I'd see it as a very positive towards the corporate governance.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Right, we've got some questions, hands up. So if we can move on, please. Councillor Paxton Hood-Williams.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. A fairly simple question, I think, compared to the other ones. But on page 26, under Child and Family Services, there was supposed to be an audit in terms of grants and contracts. All of a sudden, it becomes not required. Why does I'm really asking, why does an audit become not required after it's been put into the programme, especially in an area where I would think there's very significant expenditure as well?
Nick?
Sorry, is that on Appendix 4? Sorry.
It's on page 26 of the report, Nick. It is Appendix 4, yes.
Appendix 4.
It's part of the audit plan for 21-22, Nick.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, if there's any audits not required, we've obviously discussed the audit and the scope with the managers at the time. Now, I can certainly, I think we've provided the chair with further details into any audits that we've deferred or not required. So I'd have to go back and look at the detailed notes to them, but I can certainly pass them on once we get that information. So yeah, there obviously are reasons behind it. We have spoken with the services and the managers and so on, and we just for whatever reason, the services kind of merged. There could be a number of reasons. So I'll find that out for you, Paxton, but thanks for the question.
Okay, thanks, Nick.
If I could just add to that, normally Simon will include narrative within his report of any items that are deferred or not required, just to give some exposure as to the reasons behind it. So I don't recall seeing that one, Nick, but you may want to check on that.
You certainly will. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Paxton. Phil Sharman.
Chair, thank you very much. Perhaps, Nick, I could start with a couple of items from your report, and then Chair, I'll come back to you on a final point. In 2.6 on page 7, you talk about the work you do for the certification of government grants. In this particular case, you're reporting the housing support grant in the amount of 14 million. So, Nick, are you able to tell us whether on how the audit of that grant funding is specified? Is it that the paying department specify a number of tests for you to perform, and then you do that work and then report the findings back to them? Because I also saw later on the agenda, we got the Wales Audit Office plan for the year, and they also include a number of government grants certified by them. So it'd be useful, I think, really for the committee to understand those that are audited by internal audit and those that are audited by the Audit Wales. I can start with that. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, okay. Thanks, Phil. Yeah. So a little bit of background into our testing for that grant. basically social services and housing put together a spend plan at the start of the year, what they're going to spend the grant money on, i.e. to prevent homelessness, and then we conduct our sample testing on that plan and all supporting claims to ensure that the expenditure is correct and reconciles with our financial ledgers. And obviously once that testing is complete, an audit certificate is signed off by the principal officer for commissioning, and then either Simon or myself would countersign that, send that back to Welsh Government for their records. So yeah, we will conduct our testing, on that original spend plan, to ensure everything reconciles, with our ledgers and with the claims that are sent back.
Okay, so that set of tests has been specified by the Welsh Government in this particular case.
Ben, do you want to come in?
Yes, that's why I was going to come in on, Chair. You're absolutely right, Phil. I mean, that one is specified by the Welsh Government that it has to be subjected to an internal audit test. You rightly note that in some of them are required still only to be only external audit certification. The Welsh Government has tried to simplify the process and mean that less of them are subject to formal external audit certification. So it is a specific condition of the grant offer imposed upon us. So we had no choice over the matter other than to do it as an internal audit test to a level of satisfaction that our grant funds are ultimately the Welsh Government required.
Okay, thank you, Ben, for that clarification. Very good. Chair, I'll just move on to one other point for internal audit. And in this respect, Nick, can you just please clarify the relationship between the follow-up work which is reported in the quarterly reports and the follow-up work that's reported as a separate agenda item? I'm not entirely clear on the relationship between those two reporting items. They don't seem to directly correlate, and I just wonder why there are the two separate items presented, in the summary in the this particular report item, and then later on in the agenda. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Do you mean the we report separately on any follow-up work that we undertake for moderate assurance rating reports, because we do actually go out and retest the areas there. So any moderate assurance reports, we do a full follow-up, i.e. a retest of those recommendations. With the standard follow-ups, so basically anything that is a substantial or higher, then we've got a slightly different follow-up process where we contact the managers directly to confirm that those recommendations have been implemented. So there's two separate ones, two separate sort of paths that we take there.
No, I do understand that. That's very good. I think I'd like you to consider and perhaps come back to us on just in terms of going forward, whether your quarterly follow-up report could include both the substantive follow-ups and the routine follow-ups, and then just report this in your quarterly progress report at more of a summary level. I think at the moment, when I read the quarterly progress report, and I realise I'm only seeing these now for the first time, Nick, as a new member, but I did find that the quarterly progress report was kind of swamped by the follow-up work. And then later on, I came to a separate agenda item on follow-up, which was, well, appeared to me like a duplication and scope for simplification and reporting to the committee.
No, fair point, Phil. It's I think the reason, as I said, that we do put a little bit more emphasis on them, on the ones in the main quarterly report, because they were moderate assurance ratings and we have done a lot more work with them. So do like to report that to committee, but we'll certainly take your comments on board, and if we can wrap it all up in one separate report, maybe we can do that. Yeah, I'll have a chat with Simon.
I mean, the caveat would be providing we get a follow-up report quarterly. I think that's the key to it. If we don't, then it would need to be in your quarterly monitoring report. Chair, on my final item here, I'm happy to defer it to the substantive business on the accounts receivable report, if that's more helpful.
I think so, if it's
okay.
more detailed, because
Thank
the
you.
officers will
Yes.
come in at that point.
Sounds
then.
good. Very good. Thank you.
I've got Gordon wanting to come in now.
No, thank you, Chair. If I can go back to the accounts receivable, can we please have a breakdown? You say that the chief officers meet monthly and discuss this. Is it possible to have a breakdown of the departmental levels which make up this total and the age debt to go alongside it, so we can see whether there is one department underperforming or whether all the departments are?
Nick, have you covered that split, or is it best if we ask the accounts receivable officers to give us that information?
Yeah, it's probably easier if I come in on that one. It is broken down. It's broken down by directorate. I don't see any issue. I wouldn't want to put it into the public domain because obviously there's business and personal confidential data in there, but there should be no danger or harm in the committee seeing that information. What I would just say, Chair, if I may, is that I am the only representative here today on behalf of Accounts Receivable, and I'm nowhere near the detail, as I'm sure you can appreciate at my level. Whatever I'll give you an update today, but the reassurance is that at the next meeting there will be a detailed report coming that will be able to be interrogated more thoroughly, and any points that we raised today, I'll make sure are included in that next report.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Adam. And I would just say that there was a request to defer this item altogether on accounts receivable, but I did ask for a verbal update. I wasn't willing to not receive anything, recognising the risk that we see as a committee around this area. Are there any other hands up on this? No, I'm not seeing anything. I've just got one or two, Nick, just to raise. If I can come back to the community equipment service, you mentioned on the top of page 13 that the community equipment services is overseen by a joint partnership group being chaired by the Director of Social Services for Swansea and Neath, and also the Chief Exec of the Health Board. Are you able to tell me where that joint partnership reports to, that group reports to, and how partners are assured that the community equipment services is operating effectively?
Thanks, Chair. No, not at the minute. Again, I'll have to speak to Simon and I can get you that information ready for next week.
Okay. Adam, are you able to comment on that? Because at your level, do you see anything around the joint partnership group?
Yeah, I'm just trying to rack my brains of where that reports to. So I think it's through the area, not the area planning board, the regional planning board aspect, which sits on between the University Health Board, Swansea University Health Board, ourselves, and Neath Port Talbot. That is governed separately, has its own separate management committee, and there is a whole myriad of terms of reference around that, which we can certainly supply to the committee. I'll have a quick look now. There is a report that I bring to governance and audit that shows you all those partnerships and where their governance is and the assurance around how they're managed. So that has been to this committee to show now where that is, and I think it's due to come again later on this year, probably September time, might be later. I'm sure it'll be on the work programme to come back to give you that assurance of how it's reported, when it's reported, and who scrutinises.
Thank you, Adam. Yes, we did receive that partnership report, and yes, we are looking forward to seeing the next one. If you can, make sure that this community equipment store or group is included in that for us. That would be grateful, please. I think that was the only one. I think the other queries I had has been picked up by other members of the committee. So if we can move on to first, before I move on, is there anything else you want to say on AR, Adam or Ben?
Do you want me to pick that up, Chair, under the actual item 6?
Okay, then we'll take the FOI next then, please. Sarah Lackenby.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so this internal audit report was done in the first half of this year. And I just wanted to give you, you've got the report in front of you, but just give you a brief overview on those actions. So we have, to start with, different needs across the different directorates, just to flag. So Kim and I met with CMT, and we've been working with directors and heads of service because there are different needs across the organisation. How we can help those services to meet the deadlines, but also monitor standards. You'll see in the plan as well that we've updated, that Kim has already updated all the templates. He's revised the EIR decision tree, apologies, and he's sent out a reminder to the FOI officers as well. He's sent out several reminders, and we've also got some further training booked, programmed in for next month with all the FOI officers. Kim also attended the Place Directorate PFM DMT meeting, and there was a great interest and also great interest in attending the training from heads of service. So we're thinking we'll expand that not just for FOI officers, but also for heads of service for the training that's programmed next month. Also, you'll see that's been completed, we now have officers allocated to undertake social services SARS. SAR reviews have been, they've been allocated now, so that should continue much more smoothly. And just to flag as well, you know, a lot of the SARs that we do get are incredibly complicated, especially where they are around social services. They are complicated ones, and they do take quite significant time to do as well. But you know, you'll see across the plan, we've already tried to close as many actions as we can, and we'll come back to you with further progress. And obviously, Nick, as he said, we'll be reporting anyway on progress, but we'll be reporting directly to you as we are today as we progress through the plan and tick off all the actions. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Councillor Jeff Jones.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, for that. I can imagine that some of the requests are extremely, complicated and so on. But this seems to be a growing area, shall we say, FOI requests and SAR requests and so on. I'm glad you actually said that, shall we say, more people are actually being trained up, because there seems to be a lack of perhaps understanding. I'm only saying that as an ordinary person. I don't really know what's involved, but I understand it must be extremely complicated. But with this, shall we say, expansion in this area, are we actually taking on more staff? More staff trained and more staff employed in this area?
That's one of the things that we're working with directors and heads of service on. Yes, how we can increase capacity. It might not be looking necessarily at recruiting more staff, but it's how we can increase the skill across our existing workforce so that more staff can not only respond to FOIs, EIRs and SARs themselves, but also provide cover as well, more cover. So we're looking at whole capacity across the whole organisation.
Thanks.
Thank you. Julie Davis.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Sarah and Kim. My first question is in relation to the information not redacted. Could you tell me if that went outside the authority, please?
I'm not familiar with that particular case. Offhand, Julie, I'll have to, Kim, unless you're aware. And
sorry, I didn't quite catch the question. There's a bit of reverb, Julie. Could you just repeat that
yes, of
again?
course. I was asking whether the finding in relation to the information not redacted had gone, whether the information had gone outside the authority or whether it was internal to the authority.
Sorry, I would have to come back to you on that with a detailed response, because I'm not familiar with that particular one, but I can check that fact and provide you with that info, provide the committee with that information.
Thank you, because my concern is that it should be reported to the Information Commissioner if it has possibly gone outside. And my second question is perhaps more for Kim. You didn't agree to one of the actions in respect of a list of accounts being updated for leavers. Do you think that we need to differentiate between accountability and responsibility? Because I agree that the DPO wouldn't necessarily be responsible for doing that, but should he be accountable for ensuring that it is done, perhaps by HR, who would hold the appropriate information?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because it kind of cuts to the nub of what a DPO does, because basically I'm a monitoring officer and not with operational responsibility, somewhat like the committee. So I can't be held responsible for the fact that we're not clear on the leavers accounts being closed. So I think we need to look at where responsibility for that lies, and then using the powers that I have under as DPO to insist that the council does that. But essentially, I'm there to regulate and monitor rather than be held accountable for an item.
Well, I think possibly you're accountable, but not responsible. Not responsible for doing it. But perhaps, Nick, you could reopen that action and see that it is resolved, and if necessary, allocate another responsible owner.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. I'll certainly speak with Sarah and Kim, and we'll look into that and see what we can do on that point. Yeah.
Thank you.
When you conclude that query, can you pass the response through to Jeremy in Democratic Services, and then he could share that response with all members of the group then, please?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions for Sarah on this paper, please? Not seeing any more hands. Thank you very much for coming to present that, Sarah. And if you wish to leave, then please feel free to do so.
Thank you, Chair.
Adam, do you want to come in on agenda item 6 now?
Great, thank you, Chair. I'm going to give a brief update. As already mentioned, I feel we do need to bring a more detailed report back. As Paul has already alluded to, we did want to try and get a report and with officers, and I'll come on to a little bit of the challenges that we've currently got within the service that just made that impossible for us for this particular meeting. But I'm not sure if all members have had access to the full report or not. So if you have, apologies, but I'll just give you a bit of context and then some of the key actions to update to hopefully give you some assurance for the next month, and then give you a lot more detail with the relevant officers also being in attendance. So the report, internal audit report, was undertaken obviously at the end of the financial year 21-22. The scope of the audit, including the testing of a range of controls, that was all around financial regulations, procedure notes, user access, creation of invoices, collection of income, recovery of arrears, interface reconciliations, invoice cancellations, performance monitoring, write-offs, refunds, disaster recovery, system backups and security of data, GDPR and retention. In terms of a bit of context, 18,913 invoices were created on the AR system. That's the accounts receivable system. 94% have been paid, so been sorted, all come through, gone well. So this 6%, which is what we're talking about, that's still significant finance though to the council, and which is why we take this very seriously in terms of what we are looking to do now to move this forward and address those issues. During the review, though, looking at all the procedures, the working practices, many of them were satisfactory, but there were some key areas that did require that improvement or attention. And a lot of this was around the escalation of invoices subject to a dispute with the debtor, and also how the unpaid invoices are then treated, and some stretch over a number of years. The assurance level, as already mentioned, was moderate. Out of the report, 12 recommendations were suggested, and these have been developed now into a detailed action plan and agreed for action at CMT on the 27th of April. CMT is our corporate management team who has had a watching brief, but is stepped this up now to take more action and monitor more closely. An owner for each action has now been identified in a timescale for delivery. There's a further discussion scheduled for leadership team on the 23rd of June. That's where all heads of service and directors and the chief executive meet together to look at issues, problems, opportunities within the council, and we are going to be taking that to that meeting because, as mentioned earlier, this involves all service areas, not just the service centre who does the processing part really more than anything else. So to try and give you a little assurance of all the actions, the ones in April have already been completed and implemented. There was one for May, which was to escalate all the old disputes to the Director of Finance. That's currently underway and being worked through. All the rest are currently on track as set out in the action plan in order to be delivered. In terms of invoices being progressed, you'll know if you have seen the report that there were a low number being progressed. Number of invoices sort of forwarded to legal was only 12 in 2020, 272 in 2021, and currently, though, in the current year, we've progressed 140 so far, and obviously we're not far into that year. So you can see that there is already a marked improvement in terms of getting that processed. We've also reviewed the accounts receivable and legal protocol. That'll enable the teams to get through the lower value invoices, which we've got a backlog for, more quickly. So this will speed up and improve the whole process. And we've also developed a delegated powers report, which is an internal report for the authority in which we request under the delegated powers to either recruit or look at growing a service or developing a service in a different way. And we've put one of those through to recruit 7 staff for 7 months to support the service centre in its functions, so that we can look at delivering these more quickly, build capacity across the service centre. But we just need to bear in mind that obviously a recruitment process needs to take place. So that 7 months will be from when we can recruit those staff into that position. We've mentioned a number of times at committee as we've been looking at this, and the position hasn't changed in terms of the continued pressure and challenges that we've had, especially over the last 12 months with regard to the service centre, partly in result of helping our communities by making sure that grants and payments from government have been processed through, things like the £150 for social care staff. That's all extra work. So 57% increase in workload for the same amount of staff we've seen come through in the last 12 months. So just to put it into a perspective of what we're dealing with in the service centre. That's combined with a number of long-term sickness cases. They're being closely monitored and managed under our sickness policy, but still has a detrimental effect on what we can deliver and when we can deliver it. As I say, that is just a brief overview. We will be bringing a more detailed report and update to the next governance and audit committee, and we will have officers who can give you more of that granular detail and hopefully more depth of assurance than I can give you today. But again, if there are any questions today that I can take away and come back and complete that as part of that report, happy to do so. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Adam. Yeah, if you can make sure that all the questions and comments that have been raised today with regards to information does come back. I've got a couple more questions now as a result of your words there. Phil Sharman.
Thank you, Chair. Adam, thank you for your update. As you probably appreciate, as a member, I would have preferred a written response, but I'm encouraged to hear that that's going to be coming through to the next meeting. Certainly, I was worried that this wasn't being taken seriously, because this is the second time of a moderate assurance report on the same subject area, and the context you've outlined is useful. I think getting a project team behind it to really push it on could actually pay dividends. I can see that. I requested a copy of the more detailed report from internal audit, and that was very helpful. I think one of the worries I have is that 3.5 million outstanding after 90 days, when you look at the detail, extends to a full 2 million outstanding for more than 12 months. So I think there's a real risk of loss of income to the authority if that recovery effort doesn't work. And I do appreciate it's a partnership effort here between service end, the accounts receivable team, and also the legal team. So I think putting some effort behind that could actually end up being essentially a cost to save. It's about realizing that income through your dedicated team to kind of push it ahead, and also getting it escalated onto CMT and the senior leadership team as well. I think that's really important. But if I could just ask about and this might be where Ben needs to come in. What is the provisioning policy for providing for bad or doubtful debts? And just so I can gauge the extent of risk which is being placed on that unrecovered sum as it extends and becomes aged in its recovery process.
Do you want to comment first, Adam, and then perhaps Ben can come in?
Yeah, I think the only slight comment I would make is that the previous internal audit report was relating to the first year of COVID, as well as this report, which is the second year of COVID, of which a lot of workers had to go through the service centre, putting them under great pressure in order to turn around, as it did the whole of the authority. Bearing in mind, lots of people were taken away from their day job to one, look after our own authority, look after our residents, and deliver. So and I don't think Phil was saying that we haven't taken it seriously. I think we have. It's just in that backdrop of COVID, it has proved really difficult to get any sort of project team, any real impetus to move things forward. The only thing is that there were 17 recommendations in the 2021 report, only 12 in this one. So I'll take anything as a slight improvement in that we are improving, not at the pace I would have liked it to have done, but we have to look at it in that backdrop of COVID. So I think from that perspective, I think we should be allowed a little bit of leniency, but quite right to challenge us in how are we going to move it forward firstly. And I can give that reassurance that CMT are now actively taking a role in this as our leadership team to bring that project group, if you like, together in order to find that solution. But I'll defer to Ben for the second half of that question on the detail of finance and bad debt or doubtful debt.
Ben?
Thank you, Chair. And yes, Phil rightly assumes that probably falls more to me. The aged debt analysis is used relatively formulaically to place much heavier weight on the older debt, and a much larger proportion of it is provided for as a general provision for bad debt. We do broadly hold that centrally, but ultimately when debt is not recovered and is written off, it is ultimately a sanction back on the originating department. It has been taken seriously in the sense that I've escalated it twice on the trot to CMT, and you've had this repeatedly. So you're right to be concerned. And it is a big amount in isolation, but small in context with some of the other matters that Adam has already referred to, and certainly in the context of the hundreds of millions I'm collecting on council tax, and equally making bad debt provisions there for many millions. It is something that has reared its head in this authority previously. One of my predecessors did start to internally fine departments effectively. I mean, it's proper accounting practice to recognise the income in the service in which it is received, as Phil will be aware. And if we do go down that route, it can only be a management tool to incentivise, because ultimately still for the statutory accounts, it is recognised where it is due. The authority is in a relatively robust position, as he's heard me say, both in terms of training and previously to the committee, which means we can afford it more than most in the short term, but clearly the financial outlook is very, very challenging and it becomes much more difficult. And it is right that at the end of the day, this is public purse money and we look to recover as much as possible. And ultimately, Phil is quite right. You get to the point that once it gets beyond 6 years, we've got no scope of recovering it whatsoever. And so ultimately, some debts are written off. Adam is right. Some of them are statutory services, and it's then even more finely balanced as to how we do it, because other committee members have asked in the past, well, why don't you just not provide the services at all? And if we were a commercial entity, that's pretty much what we would be choosing to do, because ultimately that's the ultimate sanction. But there is a well-trialed method for applying it, Phil, ultimately, which is my decision when it comes to prudent income recognition in the books and where it falls. And we are able to accommodate it. But if we were less fortunate in terms of our overall circumstances, and if we hadn't had 3 substantially good years in terms of outturn, we would be having a fundamentally different conversation, a much darker tone for myself. That's not to negate or play down the importance, because this is still public money at the end of the day. But I hope that gives you some assurance that we're able to stand it in good stead. But if it were different circumstances, it would be a much darker and bleaker assessment of the position. So we're well placed, but it doesn't obviate from the point that Phil has made, which is ultimately, if it's not collected, it is ultimately a loss to the public purse.
Thank you, Ben. Adam, Chair, back to you. All done.
Yeah, thank you. Councillor Mike White.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's just a general question, really, Chair. Have we got a process of with receipts between departments, so that and a timetable set so that we're able to track the actual invoices and debt? Can you just confirm if such a process is actually in place, Ben or Adam?
Yeah, probably best if it is me. Again, the point at which department raises it goes to the service centre for processing. It is well tracked and reported, and as Adam has referred to, it is reported on monthly in terms of age debtor analysis and classified into whether it's in dispute or in arrears and age debt. So that is all in place. It comes back to that point of the last couple of years with COVID and the repurposing of the service centre. I mean, committee has heard me previously said we switched from collecting tens of millions to giving out hundreds of millions. I think that was justified for a significant period of time, but it is right that there's still ripple effects in the economy as a result of COVID. But as that repurposing unwinds, there is that issue of it becomes perhaps harder to collect from some people. There may be more can't pay rather than won't pays. But other than that, it is reasonable, and that process does exist, Councillor White.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Ben. Phil, is your hand still up? Do you have another question, Phil? No, it's down. Okay. Well, thank you for that verbal update, Adam. And obviously, it's an area that the Governance and Audit Committee have got great concern around, acknowledging some of the points that Ben has made. But we certainly will look forward to receiving a full report at the next meeting. And if you can ensure it does contain the specific information that members of this committee have asked this afternoon, that would be grateful. Okay, if we can move on to internal audit recommendation follow-up report. Nick, agenda item 7.
Yeah, thanks again, Chair. Okay, I'll just quickly run through this, but yeah, agenda item number 7 on page 43 of the reports pack is our internal audit recommendation follow-up report for our standard audits. Again, committee will be familiar with this by now, and it provides information on the status of the recommendations made for those reviews where the follow-ups have been completed in Q4. It basically allows committee to monitor the implementation of the recommendations made previously by the team. So it's a short report. It's pretty self-explanatory. So I'll move on straight to the appendices, which is on page 47. And you can see that 19 follow-ups were completed in the quarter. we've got a breakdown of the recommendations that have been implemented, and section that there's some that weren't fully implemented, and in Appendix 2 you can see that the recs that haven't been implemented, we've got reasons and comments from the client departments on why those haven't been implemented, and it's a range of issues due to some full valuations not taking place because of the number of objects in the museum and the art gallery. We've got some issues with the staff net and the website being updated and being impacted by COVID, and some of the other areas which you can see is we've got detail there. So happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you, Nick. Are there any questions on this paper, please? Not seeing any hands up. I've just got a comment with regards to the valuations of the. Oh, Phil, do you want to go first then? You're on mute, Phil.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, please. Nick, it's really, I guess, a presentation point more than anything. I won't go back over my point made earlier about the relationship between this and your quarterly update. That's been covered. But given this is quite, this is full of numbers and appendices and so on. You know what would be really helpful is some kind of graphical representation of the data which you've collected. So maybe just something like a stacked bar graph showing, for example, the recommendations made and the risk level attached to those as one bar, and then the recommendations implemented. Again, there's a stacked bar with their risk level, and it would just give a pictorial view as to how well the departments are doing, the directors are doing in terms of implementing the recommendations that you've made, and how that looks. Because sometimes when you look at the numbers, it's not so easy to get that information, but graphically, I think it would really stand out. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. And to be honest, happy to take on board any suggestions from the committee. You know, if we can make our reports more user-friendly, that's fine. We'll have to look at, you know, the reports are generated from our audit management system. So, you know, when they do come through, maybe we can look at some tweaks and maybe get a little bit more sort of graphical presentation. Yeah, we'd certainly look at that.
Oh, thank you, Nick. Thank you, Phil. Perhaps if you can do that in consultation with Simon Cockings, though, so that the Chief Auditor's got an input into it. Paxton Hood-Williams.
Just a very quick question, if I may, Madam Chairman. In terms of Swansea Museum and the valuation of those, are we including in that obviously the equipment or the assets that are held up in Morgan as well?
Nick, are you able to answer that?
All I've got, sorry, is the amount of items that need to be, you know, revalued. Obviously, you can see there's quite a number there. So in the report, detailed in the report, may have, you know, where those assets sit, but in total, you know, obviously there's a good number of thousand there which do need to be valued individually, and obviously that's going to take a number of months to complete. Probably quite an expense as well. So that's why it hasn't been implemented, and obviously we've given them a bit more time to do that.
I certainly know that. Mike, you will know full well there's an awful lot of equipment held up at the Morver site, by the Penderyn site. Huge amount of stuff there as well, so that needs to be valued as well at the same time, that's for sure.
Okay, thank you.
If I could just add to that, we've expressed concern previously about the items at both Glenvivian Art Gallery and also the Swansea Museum. and I remain concerned with the fact that those items have not been revalued. And I'd request that there's some CMT consider the risk associated with that. And I think take some legal advice as well. I think Tracy Meredith offered to have input into that, but I don't want to volunteer Tracy in her absence. So if I can make a plea, Adam, for you to take that CMT, because there's obviously significant sums of money tied up in assets in both of those areas that we need to ensure that we've got covered or addressed in some way.
Chair, if I may, if I can, I'll definitely take that back. I'm happy to do that. But if we can also assign Mark Wade, who's the director for that service, so that I want to ensure that each service is actually responsible for their areas, and they have that responsibility for assessing and making sure that claims and otherwise pick through. So if it could be a joint action between Mark Wade and myself, that would be much appreciated.
I think that's right, with your imminent departure as well. So thank you for that, Adam. Jubilee, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. It's not on that point. I'd like to take Nick back to Appendix 2, if I could. The recommendation tracker report, the recommendations not implemented. Where recommendations aren't implemented or are only partly implemented, do you work with the client service to agree a new target implementation date and monitor it? And if so, could we see that reflected in this report?
Thanks, Julie. Yeah, we do, and it really depends on if you like, the seriousness of that recommendation. I.e., with these two, they are medium risks, so we will be looking to ensure that they are completed. Sometimes you may have a good practice recommendation that they haven't completed for whatever reason, but we would pick that up next time we did the full audit, so we wouldn't keep revisiting. It all depends on the rating of that that recommendation, and of course anything that is a medium risk or higher, we will return and see where that service is for those recommendations to be implemented fully.
Okay.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Julie. No more questions on that paper. Thank you again, Nick. And can I thank you, because I think that's the last of the two items for you. Thank you for attending in Simon's absence. And if you do wish to leave to go back to carry on your auditing work, then please free to do so. The next item on the agenda is agenda item 8, which is Audit Wales 2022 Audit Plan. And I think it's either Non or Gillian that are going to join us for this one.
Thank you, Chair. I'll kick it off, and then I'll hand over to Non for her bits. So thank you. As you said, this is our 2022 audit plan, which sets out the work we plan to do to discharge our statutory responsibilities, and just informs you what we're going to be undertaking, how much it's going to cost, and who will undertake the work. I'll just quickly talk you through the financial statements work we'll be doing, and Non will then talk you through the performance work. So in terms of our responsibilities in the financial statements, they're set out in paragraph 8. We're required to give an opinion on the truth and fairness of your financial statements, to assess whether your narrative report and annual governance statement are prepared in line with guidance and consistent with the accounts and our knowledge of the council. In doing our work, we adopt a concept of materiality, that is, that misstatements might result in the reader of the accounts being misled. So our audit approach is based upon an assessment of the risks of material misstatement, and at the planning stage of the audit we've identified 5 risks, which are summarised in Exhibit 1 on page 59 of your pack. Management override of controls is viewed as a significant risk in all audited bodies in line with auditing standards. And then we've got one on the historic cost appreciation, which is a hangover from last year's accounts, but we've been working hard with your capital accounting team to resolve that. We've also got accounting for COVID-19 funding. Again, council in common with other councils has received significant monies from Welsh Government. It's a question of how things have been treated. Some are principal and some are on an agency basis. We've also got the valuation of the Copper Bay development, which has come into use in the year, and then asset valuations. Again, that's in common with other councils across Wales and across England as well, that due to uncertainties from COVID, Brexits and increases in building costs, there is a risk that assets revalued as part of your 5-year rolling programme, not at 31st of March 22, may not be quite at the same value due to rising prices. So those are the main areas on our financial audit work, and if Non just wants to talk you through the performance audit.
Thanks, Gillian. Pnawn da bawb. I'm Non Jenkins, the Performance Audit Manager for Swansea Council, as well as the other 5 in the Mid and West area, including Neath Talbot, Pembrokeshire, Carmarthenshire, Ceredigion and Powys. So nice to meet you, and thank you for inviting us. So for the performance audit work, we also do this as part of the duties that the Auditor General has to undertake, and they're set out from paragraph 15 onwards. And as you will know, throughout the pandemic, we've adopted a flexible way of working with councils and public bodies because we know the priorities for you are delivering out there on the front line. So we've adopted that and hopefully worked alongside you in a helpful way rather than be of any hindrance in that sense. So, and thank you also in that sense for that and for inviting us in to work alongside you. So for 22-23, we intend to continue with this approach because I think we found mutually helpful to work alongside and also helped us be more responsive and timely in the way that we do our work, rather than you having to wait for things to happen. And hopefully then you get the outputs as governance and audit committees sooner than you would otherwise. So thank you for that, and looking forward to continuing to work with you in the same way. Now, last year, and we anticipate going forward also, that a significant proportion of our local performance audit programme will continue to be delivered through our ongoing assurance and risk assessment project. And that also will look at how you, as a council, look at your risk management arrangements too, and how you manage risk. Because where we find councils are on top of their risk management, that gives us assurance. So it helps both ways then, that we're open to with each other about that. So we'll be looking for assurance from your arrangements on your risk management too. And given the high degree of commonality of the risks facing councils at the moment, we intend to continue really to deliver a number of thematic projects examining risks common to all councils. This year we did, it was called Springing Forward, but we looked at workforce and assets and how people and how councils were moving forward with their workforce and asset thoughts and plans and ideas because of the pandemic, and had learnt and changed a lot since then. So we're looking to do digital this year as to how COVID has potentially helped or hindered that moving forward too, and learning from good practice and what's happened since. So that's going to be our thematic going forward across all of the councils. We also consult with you about doing national studies, and we have just closed that for this year, and we'll be doing the same next year too, and we do it every year, so you're very, very welcome. In fact, I'd encourage you to get involved in responding to our consultation on that, because we want your thoughts and ideas, and don't think just for Swansea, think for regional and national too as part of that. So you're very welcome to contribute to those thoughts. So just the exhibit 2 there on your page 62, our page 8, just sets out briefly what our ongoing assurance risk assessment work is about, what are the key themes that we'll be looking at: financial position, capital programme, governance, use of performance information, and obviously the setting of your wellbeing objectives. We intend to undertake a kind of a regional thematic review on unscheduled care with our health colleagues, which I think has been kicked off at the moment. So we're undertaking that now over the next few months, and you will have seen in the press last week our paper on waiting times on that in terms of the data. So you're it should be on our website too, so you're very welcome to have a look through that if you haven't seen it in the press yet. And our thematic review, as I said, at the time of writing this, it was to be confirmed because we were out to consultation, but we've now closed it and we can confirm it's going to be digital going forward. And our local project with you is to be confirmed, but hopefully we can build on the really interesting work that we did, and Adam can take you through it, in terms of learning from COVID, what's worked, what's not worked, to help you move things forward. So that's really the key elements of our performance work. And then obviously going on to the next page is our fee, and you will see that the fee rates have increased across the board really by 3% as a result of needing to invest in audit quality in response to increasing cost pressures. I mean, this relates to a number of the issues that were raised in England in terms of audit quality. So our requirements and duties have increased and escalated as a result, and that's where that comes from. If you were going to ask, which I'm sure you were going to, but it, as I keep telling council, this is an estimate, and we often also give refunds because we can't charge more than we need to in that sense. So we don't make a profit of any of this. So this is an estimate for the year for you. And then last but not least, on your page 65 is the audit team, and then going forward from that, the timetable as to when you're likely to see and feel and get the reports through to audit committee. Diolch yn fawr. Any questions on that before I go on to the timetable?
I'm not seeing any hands up, Non, so if you can carry on.
Okay. So as you can see there, we now send, I think it was...
Sorry, Non. Sorry, Gordon, you had a question.
Which timetable are you referring to now? We move on to page 68.
Sorry, I'm not able to see that.
Are you on page 68 timetable?
Yes.
Can I go back to page 66?
Page 66 timetable, Gordon wants to go back to now.
Okay.
Yeah, if I go back to your audit risk on COVID-19 funding, where the authority is responsible for issuing grant aid to organisations outside of the council, I can't find it on your audit timetable on Exhibit 5.
Gillian, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, it's not actually on the timetable. That forms part of our accounts audit work. So as part of our accounts work, we need to ensure that you have correctly accounted for the grant funding. If you've given it out on an agency basis, you have no choice about how you account for it. That wouldn't be included in your accounts. Whereas if you have some discretion about how you use the funded, then that will be included in your accounts. So our audit risk there is just to make sure that you've actually accounted for it. And in terms of the timetable, it's under the audit of financial statements work.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that. Phil Sharman.
Chair, thank you. Maybe I'll start with, if I can, follow up to that previous query about the significant payments the council has made. Ben indicated earlier the scale of those being in the order of 100 million or so. So could I ask WAO to begin with, what work is being undertaken within their programme on the controls applied by the council to ensure that the COVID payments that were made were regular, without fraud or or error and in accordance with the conditions of the grant. And if any work, I'm drawing a distinction here between essentially the substance of the payments rather than their accounting treatment. And if there is any work in this area, to what extent will it read across from any work that internal audit have completed on COVID grants? Thank you.
Gillian, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think I'm best placed for that. Thank you for the question, Phil. In terms of regularity isn't an issue that applies to local government. That's central government and an NHS requirement. But in terms of fraud, we're, as you know, as external auditors, required to look for material fraud and to remain alert to fraud. Responsibilities for putting systems in place and detecting fraud rests with the authority. In terms of the agency transactions, again, that's a Welsh Government requirement to make sure that the processes they put in place and the requirements for the scheme are robust as far as they possibly can. I understand internal audit have done some work on checking controls around making payments, so maybe Nick might want to answer on that bit.
Do you want to come in, Nick?
Yeah, thanks, Gillian. Yeah, just to confirm, Phil, that our fraud team and ourselves have provided extensive help and support to the services within the council responsible for issuing the COVID grants. Further details on that will be provided in next month's committee when fraud provides their annual report. So I won't go into specific details, and probably Ben will come in as well, but yeah, there's certainly been high profile within our team, and we have been providing a lot of support to those client services that have been issuing the grants.
Ben, do you want to come in as well?
Yes, to echo what Nick has said, and also our external audit colleagues, yes, the obligation is on me as the accounting officer for the payments made by the authority, and so I have made what I consider to be appropriate internal audit and fraud provision for checking those payments for eligibility and removing risk of duplicate or fraud payments and making appropriate recovery actions. As Gillian has said, to some of the regulatory testing part of it will be a separate part done by the Auditor General for Wales in terms of his assessment of the arrangements that the Welsh Government has done as a whole. But there is clearly a degree of complexity and interaction between the two, where Welsh Government officials are relying on us as the 22 individual local authority treasurers to have proper and appropriate systems in place. So it's a mixed economy, but rest assured a lot of the internal audit provision has been redirected to ensure that there are reasonable sample tests of all payments for the various types. They were all developed at pace, but there are a range of different testing techniques applied on all of them. Some of them, a judgment call has been taken on the degree of the percentage trading off the pace at which some of certainly the early payments had to be made versus the others. But I am satisfied as a Section 151 officer for the authority that I made appropriate arrangements for them. The monies that were entrusted in me by Welsh Government, but the Auditor General will, I'm sure, continue to form a view on the overall status and adequacy of the arrangements in much the same way as the National Audit Office will do for the UK Government.
Very good, Chair. I do have other questions on for Audit Wales. I can defer those until they complete their presentation if you like. That was just to follow up on the grants point.
Yes, please, Phil, if we can allow Non now to finish the report, and then we'll come back to further questions. Non?
Thank you. Diolch. Yeah, I'll quickly just go through this. I'm not going to go through it in any detail because I think it's self-explanatory in that sense, but just to give the context, since last year, we prepare a timetable with programme updates and timetables, for every council on a quarterly basis, and they come to governance and audit committee. Sorry, I'm getting a lot of feedback. Apologies for that. So you can see there basically quarterly where we're up to on everything. And we also provide you with links where we have posted them on our website. So as you can see, the financial sustainability one, there's a link there for you to click on so you can read through. So hopefully this document will help you kind of anchor point to go back to and click on anything and get update where we are on everything that we're involved with that you might be interested.
Thank you, Non. I am grateful for this timetable because it includes other regulatory information as well, which is what we were missing some time ago. So I'm really grateful for the updates you keep giving us, and certainly it gives us an ability just to see where those other reports are sitting and how the council manages to respond and to ensure action is taken. It's something that's in the audit tracker that we'll no doubt discuss it in a little while, but I am grateful for the work you're putting into this, and also for the work that Adam's done previously and Richard in ensuring that all these reports go through a central depository and then disseminated and tracked from that source. Okay, so is that concluding your report now, Non? Okay,
Thank you very much.
I'll come back to you now then, Phil.
Thank you, Chair. So just a couple of points on financial and a couple of points on performance. So if I start with Gillian. Gillian, you do mention in your financial statements work, you're looking at the risk of material misstatements. Are you able to indicate to the committee what level of materiality you're working to on Swansea, City and County of Swansea?
Yeah, thank you, Phil. We usually calculate it as sort of 1% of gross expenditure. We will report the actual figure back to you in our financial statements or ISA 260 report later in the year. But I think on last year's draft accounts, it was around about 9.3 million.
Okay. No, thank you. We've just heard some reports from internal audit around the accounts receivable function, and learned that there are around about 2.5 million of accounts aged more than 90 days, and 3.5 million at more than 90 days, and 2 million at more than 12 months old. Is that an area which you're likely to focus on when you're doing the review of debtors within the financial statements?
We will be looking at it, yes, particularly the bad debt provision, really, because that again is an area of risk of management overrides. So there is a risk it could be manipulated. Yeah. And that is something we'll look at to make sure it's realistic. If your accounts receivable, as you said, they've gone up, the number of debts, we would expect perhaps the provision to have moved. So we will be looking at that in some detail.
Very good, thank you. And the last point on financial, I see that you'll be putting or certainly Director of Finance will be putting the accounts on public deposit. Can I ask either Ben or yourself, what will be the date for the public deposit of the accounts? And if I could just add a follow-up, what level of public questions or objections have been raised in previous periods?
Can I ask Ben to respond to those questions, please?
Thank
Yes,
you.
and before I do respond to those, Chair, I would equally go back to the previous question that Phil raised, and in the draft accounts, it will come as no surprise that I have increased the bad debt provision, and also when audit come to check it, they will see that I have applied otherwise consistency along with previous years, which is what you would expect unless there were compelling reasons to the contrary. So I thought that would be helpful for me to put in. In terms of the training I gave and reference to audit committee previously, there are provisions under the coronavirus regulations for there to be a deferral of the accounts. This was the first year that it was meant to be the 31st of May. In the two previous years, we achieved the 31st of May in the shadow year. We are not in that position this year, and the relevant statement has already been published and processed. That is an open-ended statement at the moment in terms of the date that it will be put on deposit. It's a matter that I will discuss with Gillian. I'm due to see her again on Monday in terms of taking stock of where we are. It is an unfortunate position, but it's further complicated not only by local arrangements but a range of national matters SIPF has opened up a consultation on particular valuing infrastructure assets, and as the external auditors have rightly raised, given some of the inflationary impacts the economy is seeing, there are particular concerns around some of the valuations on balance sheet where billions of pounds worth of assets could easily have moved by hundreds of millions of pounds and clearly breached that £9.3 million materiality threshold. So it's unfortunate that it's not a specific date at the moment. When the date is called, arrangements are made to advertise it and to make it aware to the local populace. Phil, you'll probably be aware also that in reality, electors have unlimited rights of access to stuff, however expensive it is to do. That's a bit of a double-edged sword for me. I do like having some challenges because it keeps us on our toes. We do have one regular questioner of a whole raft of matters who often does turn up to council and rightly hold my toes to the fire along with others. There have been occasional instances of other interested parties that have raised matters. We tend to only have 2 or 3 in a year. We've had a couple of instances that I can recall over the last 10 years, and I'm speaking partly on behalf of Gillian because she's relatively new in role, whereas I've been here a lot longer. There have been a couple of formal matters raised specifically with the Auditor General's representatives, and they've been investigated appropriately or deemed to be not within scope, because sometimes the questions and questioners lose sight of what it is meant to be. It's meant to be questions on the accounts themselves, and sometimes there can be some unusual items, and some authorities have got themselves into an unfortunate position where it can potentially be misused. I am pleased to say that in terms of our experience, in terms of the local populace and the questions that are asked, 99% of them are perfectly reasonable and logical questions to be asked, and right that they are appropriately answered. But it's always one of those double-edged swords, isn't it? Because given that it's an obligation upon us, I think it works relatively well. I'd be disappointed if there was none. I wouldn't be desperately excited to have lots, because that in itself then takes up an awful lot of time. I think that's probably helpful. I would defer to Audit Wales if they wanted to add anything, but I thought it was probably more helpful for me to answer that one, if Gillian didn't mind, on the basis I've been doing this longer in Swansea than she has, albeit she's my regulator.
Thank you, Ben.
No, that's fine, Ben. I think we'll just say that, yeah, when we meet next week, we'll agree a date for the inspection.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Just on the performance side, if I can. Non, can I ask whether you're considering either within the local project scope or otherwise as a multi-agency project, the city deal and the regeneration? I think previously at our meeting back in May, Director of Finance indicated there's, I think, a total of 1.2 billion has been spent across several neighbouring local authorities in the Swansea area. So part of that obviously extends to Neath and beyond. Whether the scope, and I do realise that Gillian's looking at the valuation accounting treatment of assets being brought into use, that's fine. But what I'm talking about here is the use of the public money to yield significant infrastructure improvements, both in the city of Swansea, but also beyond that. And, you know, whether essentially there's been good use made of the £1.2 billion multi-agency funding for that purpose.
Gillian, do you want to respond to that?
I think None might be better placed to answer that one. Sorry.
No, that's fine. That's fine. Yeah, and I think Ben can come in too. The city deal work is separate. It's a separate audit plan in that sense. It's a separate audit because it's a separate entity in that sense. So we will be looking at it as part of that at a high level in terms of performance and in terms of financial accounting. So yes, it is separate, but yeah.
Thank you for that. And Chair, my final question relates to a piece of work which I see has been reported, but I don't see anything coming before the Audit Committee at this stage. And it is your published report, I think, on the COVID, coming out of COVID. I saw that was published in April as a final, and it's showing on your report. Could you explain to me the arrangements of bringing that in front of the Governance and Audit Committee, and perhaps Adam might also, indicate the arrangements for processing value for money reports within the authority and the response to them, because I realise there will be a due process there and that point at which the Governance and Audit Committee is involved. Thank you. Thank you, Phil. There is a process, and I'd like to invite Adam in to explain that process for Phil.
Thank you, Chair. If I take the first part of that question first, and then I'll get onto the value for money. So the coming out of COVID was a different piece of work to the usual kind of process we go to in terms of a formal report. It was based on a system of listening trio. So it's trying to capture good practice and understanding what were the challenges of COVID as a new way of working. So it was a pilot kind of study, really, that didn't end up so much with a report as a set of outcomes over, I think it was 7 distinct areas. So it was to do more around, for example, social interactions, the use of technology such as Teams, and it was learning for us that has then gone through to our CMT, gone through to our leadership team about how we return to a new world after COVID and what lessons we can learn from the way we operated. So things like there's the red tape busting kind of situation. What requirements did we loosen or change in order to give us better flexibility in the way we operate? It told us about how do we have those corridor conversations and what have people done differently. So some people would sort of have a get together on Teams as an informal, or they would have a sort of a game session, if I can use that, but a professional game session, not as in a normal games, but where they do some sort of learning and some sort of different in order to connect with perhaps new members of staff, team building, those kind of things. So it was more a practical base coming out with it was ultimately a presentation that was joint between myself and my team and Audit Wales. So there's no set report as such on this one. It was a way of, can we use a different kind of system in order to help facilitate something during a time when we didn't have lots of availability for reports or lots of evidence gaining. So it was done through listening trios, 3 people from outside, 1 a spectator, and then we moved them round in order to capture views. So it was more that sort of process. I could certainly look at, well, I probably can't, but I can get somebody to look at how we could report something in terms of the outcome of that and how we've actually embedded it moving forward into the new ways of working for the council, if that would be helpful. But there's no formal document as such to tangibly get hold of in that way, just a lot of sort of a big spreadsheets and things that have got all the data in that we've analysed and then brought out into various bits. So sorry, long sort of explanation, but happy to get someone to pull something together if you think that would be useful. I'll pause there before I go on to the value for money.
If I can hold a minute, Ben has got his hands up. Is it about the same thing, Ben?
No, mine was coming back in on Phil's question about the city deal, so I'll come in due course, Chair.
Okay. Non, are you going to add to what Phil have just said?
Yeah, thank you for that, and thanks Adam for explaining. Also happy to bring something to Audit Committee, and just as a background really. Yes, we do assurance work, and you might expect a traditional report from that, but it's not just reports that we prepare. So because we're trying to come from it from a perspective of supporting the council to move forward, and because this was around COVID, hopefully trying to support some learning from it so you can use it in other things that you're doing. So you will get different outcomes and outputs from it depending on the work that's and how we're doing that work. It could be a survey, there are different ways, but ultimately we will summarise all of our work in the annual audit summary anyway. But it would be useful, I think, Adam, to reflect on how you've taken that work we did with you forward at Audit Committee, because that would be useful for us too, to understand how you've taken it forward. So thank you.
Adam, can I just check with you? One of the scrutiny committees have not received that report as well, because often some of the Audit Wales reports go to scrutiny committee or one of the scrutiny groups. And
Sorry, Chair, there's been no report, no formal report on that because it wasn't a formally reported way in return to coming out of COVID.
okay.
So the best I've got is there was a presentation that was done between one of non-staff, myself and one of my team, that did it more of a workshop of outputs than a formal report. So it hasn't gone anywhere other than into CMT, new ways of working, how we're looking at our agile strategy. So it's influenced a lot of documents and policies and practices rather than a black and white report.
Okay. Okay. Can I ask on that same point then, the assurance and risk assessment that's also in that performance table, I'm assuming that's not going to be a formal report either in that case?
Yeah. Yes, it will be. What we do at the end of the year is just summarise the key points coming up from those key areas. And we also use that work to inform our audit plan. So the audit plan before you will be based on our assurance and audit risk over the previous year and the years before. So you do get an output from that one.
So there will be a report on that. And when will we expect that then, Non?
When we have completed our carbon reduction work and financial position work, and hopefully, and we're drafting at the moment our bringing forward report. So after those, we'll be able to bring that to you. I can't give you an exact at the moment because it all depends on work and resources, but hopefully by the next committee.
Okay, that's fine. Phil, do you want to add any more to that question before Ben comes in?
All done on that one. So yes, Ben, on City Deal, thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
Yes, thanks, Chair, for bringing me back in. And just to clarify, I think it came up when we did the training to you as committee members rather than a formal meeting of the committee. So that £1.2 billion city deal, over 600 million is private sector money. That leaves 241 million. I think I've got these the right way around. 241 million, which is UK Welsh Government, and 396 million, which comes from the 8 constituent partners. Our Audit Wales colleagues for Swansea will only be auditing the bit that is ours, which is effectively £50 million of that. As colleagues have said, there is a separate entity. I mean, it's the joint committee for the city deal, which isn't a body corporate, which would be the primary focus. And in reality, because it's not a body corporate, the accountable body is Carmarthenshire County Council. So I'm sure there will be a role for National Audit Office and Audit Wales in terms of their views in reporting back to respectively to Welsh Government and UK Government. But for my external audit colleagues here, they will only be testing the elements that are related to the Swansea element, which is around £50 million worth of public sector funding flowing in, with substantially larger sums put in by staff. And I thought I'd help clarify that, and I hope that helps clarify, Phil, that there's a primary focus elsewhere. There are elements of it because it's material spent by the authority, but you can expect the majority of the focus to be elsewhere, because that's where the bulk of the CTDL and certainly the accountable body sits. I hope that clarifies the position.
Thank you, Ben.
Very good, Ben. Thank you, Chair.
Just one final comment on the report, and it's regards to Eston. I was just glad to see that the Eston inspections will resume in autumn of this year, because they've been suspended for a while. So I'm glad to see them back in. Adam, did you want to add any more?
Yeah, sorry, it was just the second part of Phil's comment. He asked about value for money in terms of how we look at sort of that best value for money. If it's okay, Phil, with you, if I can signpost you to the 9th of March 2021 committee papers, there's a whole paper on value for money and benchmarking. So probably rather than trying to explain it all now and take another sort of 20-30 minutes, if you want to have a look at that, get in touch with me outside of the meeting if you wish. Happy to go through any part of that with you. It will come back later this year as an update anyway, so you'll have another opportunity to explore that even further.
Very good. Thank you. Lovely. Thank you, Norm. Thank you, Gillian.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you to all the colleagues Wales for your presentation. If we can move on then to the last two papers. The next one is agenda item 10, which is the tracker report. And I'm looking for any comments on that. There's a lot of works ongoing with dates when we're expecting those information, but I would draw attention to page 87 and the reference 74 dated the 8th of February to the ability of the council to track external audit recommendations and indeed any other regulator recommendations. And I note it's ongoing. The software performance solution is being put together and shared with corporate procurement. Adam, can you give us an update on that one, please?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We've gone through a full scoping exercise on how we can do this. We have a supplier now that we're looking to onboard, and we should be able to progress now moving forward in terms of getting that system in place. I'll have to come back with a bit more of a timeline because it's subject to the detail of that tender process. So we're obviously going through the final stages. Hopefully be able to give a verbal update at the next meeting. I'd rather not do a report for that one, if I may, in light of it's not that far between now and the next meeting, and with clearances, I'll struggle to get a report done for that. But I will certainly be able to give a verbal update.
If I can ask, you can give sufficient update, although it's verbal, to give us assurance that work is progressing, because this has been an area of concern by members of the Governance and Audit Committee for some time, and it's something I've raised with the former Chief Exec, and it seems to be dwindling on. I have also raised it with the interim Chief Exec in my last meeting with him. I think it's something that we need to batten down as soon as possible.
Yeah, we have to go through a proper process though, Chair. We have to go through a proper procurement exercise, which does take time, unfortunately, in order to get the right system at the right place. The danger is we try and rush something through and we end up with something not fit for purpose. So I wouldn't want to do that. It's too an important issue in order to try and just rush something through. So it has taken a while, but it is to get the right system.
Okay, thank you, Adam, for that. Are there any other questions on anything in that tracker? No. If we can move on to agenda item 11, the work plan. The work plan gives us opportunity to consider if what's contained in the future meetings is what we need to have to fulfil the terms of reference, and it also gives us the opportunity to add anything that we feel we want further work undertaken on or further reports brought back. Unless there's anything immediately coming to mind, can I ask, as I did at the last meeting, if there's anything you could forward on to Jeremy for him to include in that work plan, and we can pick it up at the future meetings. Unless there are no other questions, all of those reports were for information, so there was nothing to approve. So can I just take the opportunity of thanking our three colleagues around the table and our officers for attending the meeting today, and also thank you to all those attending remotely. Stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you at the next meeting.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye.
Yeah, thank you.
Ta-ra.